Hello and welcome to today's webinar on improving your Extranets user experience. My name is Peter Carson. I'm going to be your presenter today. Just a quick background on myself. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager and also an Office Apps and Services Microsoft MVP. My contact details are here. We're going to be sharing a copy of the slide deck as well as the recording up on our website, so you'll have all the details to be able to follow up from there. A little background for those of you not familiar with Extranet User Manager. It's been around for some time now in a variety of different forms. It's really been the last sort of four years or so that it's launched out as its own product. Before that, it was more of a bespoke custom solution for clients of Envision IT. And we've added in a number of different features over the last number of years, particularly around the Azure Active Directory B2B. We're actually going to be talking about that a fair bit today. And the user-centric login is a big part of what we're talking about with user experience here today as well. Customers all over, primarily North America, US and Canada, but good representative in Europe, a little bit in Australia and Asia as well. So a quick agenda of what we're going to cover off today. We may not need the full hour. It's a fairly tight set of things that we want to look at around the user experience side of things. So we're going to start with a little background on what user experience is and how it pertains to Extranets. Then we'll jump into a bit of an overview and feature set on Extranet User Manager, talk a bit about licensing, which I promise is very simple. We don't tend to make that very complicated. And then the meat of the session, we're actually going to get into a demonstration of the new test drive features we're launching this week on our public website. The interactive side is open, so if you've got questions, please feel free. We've got moderators watching that, and they can jump in and answer those as we go through. I'll take a look at when we get to the end of the session as well. If there's any we haven't covered off, I will look to address those there. Now, before we start, I always like to get a sense of the audience and what sort of technologies are you using today. We've got a fairly short list. It's really focused in on what we're going to be looking at here today. So let me open this poll up. If you could give me a quick sense, are you using either or both of Office 365 and SharePoint on-premises? And also, are you familiar or using Microsoft Flow that we're going to be talking about today as well? There we go. We've got everybody back on that. So let me actually close that out, and I'll go ahead and share it back. I usually say that the Office 365 number keeps getting higher. Well, at 100%, it can't get much higher than that. So that's awesome to see. Everybody's in the cloud doing things there. Lots of folks, though, still using SharePoint on premises as well. So maybe some hybrid stories there. And about half the folks using Microsoft Flow. We're going to talk more about that if you're not familiar with what Flow is. It's a workflow engine from Microsoft in the cloud. A very cool design surface to it. Nice to use from that point of view. So we'll talk more on that side. All right, let me hide this, come back to my presentation, and away we go. All right, so a little background from a user experience point of view. I mean, there's a lot of different opinions. I actually did a little bit of searching as I was prepping for this session on how best to explain user experience. One of the things I found was an interesting concept called the user experience honeycomb. Morville, a UX expert, has been publishing and talking about for some time now, and it's really looking at the things that drive user experience. And you'll see what seems like repeated things in here, but they're actually quite complementary. So if we think of useful versus usable, I mean, those sound like the same thing, but they're actually very different. Is it useful? Are you providing value in what you're doing here from a user experience point of view? But then beyond that, is it actually usable? Are people able to extract that value from it, which kind of comes to that center core concept of valuable in there. Desirable is all about drawing people in. Is it compelling? Is it attractive? Is it beautiful? That's an important part of user experience. Accessible is an incredibly important part these days. Accessibility has been overlooked in the past, making sure that folks who maybe aren't able to visually see the site can still interact with it, who have cognitive difficulties, whatever the case may be. Are we making sure that that site is accessible to the full audience that we want to address from that point of view? Is it credible? Do people not just find value to it, but do they believe that value? Is it resonating from that point of view? And then lastly, findable, are people able to discover the information, the value that they're looking for in there? If it's hidden and they can't find it, there is no value to it because they weren't able to discover it from that point of view. So a number of factors drawing in from a user experience point of view. So let's turn that around and talk about why is that important in your extranet? And the first thing to remember is that your external users, you may not even know who that group represents, and their range of technical competence could be all across the spectrum, from somebody who's very comfortable with technology, understands the browser and how to create an account and get onto your site and extract value from that, to somebody who's entirely not comfortable from a technology point of view, and any barriers, any confusion that you put up in that is going to represent them dropping off because they're just not able to get past those barriers. The second thing to remember is, they may not be highly motivated to use your portal. You may want your customers to come into your customer portal, but if they're not seeing that value there, they don't understand that, they're not going to be highly motivated to get in there. And if the value is hidden behind barriers, again, and people don't get far enough in there before they see that value, again, they're just going to drop off from that point of view. So really, the big thing you need to think about is how do you prevent them from dropping off or not using the portal at all. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is just the whole account creation and onboarding. This is, in my opinion, the biggest barrier. Just getting people authenticated into your extranet portal is often a big challenge. And that's where we see the most drop off. People just get confused in the process. There's too many steps. It's not well understood, and they just give up. They don't successfully complete that process. And if they don't have an account, they're never going to discover any of the value within that portal, and they're gone from that perspective. Next is, okay, I have an account, but now what do I do? Things like groups. How do I get invited into a group that gives me certain permissions, shows me certain content? How do I find that group? How do I join them? Is there approvals around that? This is where the Microsoft Flow part comes in as well. And then ultimately, once you get them in there, what's the content that's there? How are you providing value through that content on that side? So let's start with the first piece that I was talking about, the critical one, just the whole account creation, onboarding, sign-in process. And this is often a very confusing spot for people. And one of the first points of confusion is, I don't even know if I need to create an account or sign in. I think I signed into your portal a year ago, but I don't recall, and I'm not sure what account it was that I used to do that. Those sorts of questions are common things that your external users are going to have. So why don't we just remove that question from the user? Have a single flow that doesn't care whether you're an existing user or a net new user, and we'll figure that out as we go through that journey and prompt the user along appropriately from that. So we did a webinar back in the spring. We actually did a lot of work on the product specifically around this, of having a single registration login flow. And that was for our native experience. What I'm going to talk about today is how we've now extended that into Office 365 and Azure AD B2B. The second thing is users have too many accounts to manage. I use a password manager, 1Password. I love it. In fact, I need to give a talk on just the value of password managers. Most people don't, and it's unfortunate because they've got all these different accounts. It's very confusing. They've got credentials on different systems, and then people get lazy and they just start using the same password on multiple different systems, which is a really bad idea from a security point of view. If one of those systems get compromised, then hackers have access not just to that one system, but potentially every other system you choose those same credentials on from that point of view. So let's keep that simple. Let's remove some of that confusion for the external user. And a big part of that is to use federation. So well, let's let the user use credentials that they already have. And I'm not talking about sharing a password. I'm talking about using your Microsoft, your Google, your Facebook, identity that you already have from a social point of view to come into the system. That's not always appropriate. It depends on the style of extranet, where you may not want somebody using their Facebook account to come into a highly secure extranet. Okay, that's fair enough. Maybe they can use their Office 365 credentials, or maybe they need to set up a local account. But let's keep that very simple for them. And what we're going to do is we're going to perform that validation and check and see if they're already registered as part of that process. So as we get into the demo, I'll show you how that works. The next part is to make it a single seamless experience. If people need to stop the flow that they were working on, go to their email, start a new session, enter in their email address yet again, even though you've already asked for it, that becomes a barrier because it's not a simple, seamless experience. So let's have the minimum number of steps, and let's go right from initial point of contact through registration, right to signed in into the portal, all in one contiguous step. So we'll show you what that looks like. And then brand obviously is very important as well. You want to see your brand throughout that whole experience, both in our product side from an Extranet user manager point of view, as well as where Microsoft comes into that. So when we're talking about Office 365, unfortunately, we need to use the Microsoft login experience, but we can brand that too. So we can make it feel like it's part of the same experience and make that as seamless as possible for the users that are coming in. Next is groups. So, what is the purpose of your portal, and what different groups get represented by that? There may be just one group for the entire portal. That is sometimes the scenario. More often, though, there is multiple different groups. Maybe you've got different projects, and each project has different members that get represented by a group that they belong to. Customer sites that each customer has their own unique view in there, committees, et cetera, and there needs to be security and privacy between those different groups. So people need to get into groups, and that can happen in a number of different ways. You may know who those people are that need to be in that group that you're owning and managing, and you can directly invite them. You can bulk upload in Excel, bring those people in. Sometimes you don't know who those people are, but you may know someone who does know those people. So the idea of private registration links, where you can say, well, let's share this link with somebody. They can share it with other people who can share it with other people, and kind of organically build that group. Now, you may still want approvals on that so that, as it gets shared out there, people just aren't automatically added to the group. You can still have that step in there as part of that. And then lastly, publicly discoverable groups where, you just want it available to anybody that wants to sign up. And again, there might be an approval on there, or it could literally be a wide open group that people can just join and go from there. In fact, that's the scenario we're going to use from a demo point of view, just because it's easy to demonstrate, where people can discover a group, request to join it, and they're immediately in it, and they can start working from there. Now, it's not just about the external users, though. It's about your owners as well. And we have this model of delegation that we strongly endorse, that your IT or your central organization shouldn't own and manage these external groups. The people in the business that know who those people are, say it's a project site, the project manager for that project should be the owner, and they should be managing who's coming into that, what content they're seeing, and how that works. So we want to make it easy for the owners as well as the external people. Make it easy for them to invite, to approve new members. And what we've done is we've created a SharePoint framework website I'll be showing you in a minute. You can actually embed right into your Office 365 SharePoint site. In fact, you can even put it into your Teams if you want it as part of the Teams interface, and allow the owners to invite users, approve users, remove users, do all those basic user management functions right in context of where they're working, whether that's in SharePoint or in Teams. So that's a bit about the journey and user experience impact from an Extranet user point of view. Let's talk about our product itself for a minute here. Why would you use Extranet User Manager as part of this? And before we dive into that, these are some questions that we typically ask clients as we're starting an engagement to understand what type of Extranet they're building. And the things you need to think about is, well, who's coming into the Extranet? Does everybody see the same information? Is there just one group, or is there customer sites or project sites or community sites that need to be unique within that? Often there's some sort of member database that needs to be interfaced as well. Maybe you're using Dynamics 365 or Salesforce or something like that from a CRM point of view, that you want to track these interactions and track these members that are coming in. Is the site invitation only, or can people self-register? Sometimes you don't want the ability for anybody to self-register. It is strictly invitation. More often than not, though, we want some sort of self-registration as part of that. If there is self-registration, who approves those new registrations? And is it just, say, Office 365 that they're coming into? Or are there other systems? Is there single sign-on and other security concerns you need to do as part of that? So just as you're thinking about your Extranet, these are some questions that we like to pose to help guide what makes the most sense from that point of view. And if the decision is, we're going to be using Office 365 as our target for our Extranet, often we get asked, well, why don't we just use the out-of-the-box features? In fact, I'm out in Redmond right now this week. I'm meeting with the product teams on both the Azure AD identity side and later today on the SharePoint and OneDrive engineering side to talk about this, to say, you know what they're doing is really cool and makes a lot of sense in certain scenarios. Go back to those questions and think about, you know, the style of extranet, the number of users that are coming in. If it's very small, external sharing actually works really well. You know, we call that an unstructured extranet. Hey, I want to share this PowerPoint presentation that I'm showing with a select group of people. Use the share features that are right in SharePoint. They work really well. I use them myself all the time. We get calls from potential clients to say, hey, I've got a board of directors site that I want to put up for 14 board members. You know, can your product help us with that? Well, it can, but it's probably overkill. You know what? You could probably just set up the board site, the committee sites, and use the out-of-the-box sharing features to do that. You know who those users are. If they need a little bit of hand-holding to onboard them, you can do that one-on-one with them. As that scales up into hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of external users, that just doesn't work well. It's just not scalable. So then often the conversation comes to Azure Active Directory business to business. So this is a feature of Azure Active Directory that allows you to invite in guest users. It needs to all be driven through the Azure portal. So it's a little bit overwhelming. It's not something that you can easily delegate to the business. Microsoft's making inroads there. They're making changes to improve that experience, but today, you know, that's maybe not the best choice from a, hey, I want to delegate this out to the business itself. And things like self-registration, integration of line of business systems, on-premises AD, you know, those don't exist. You need to custom build that. And those are things that we can provide as part of Extranet User Manager. We can provide that self-registration, profile management, the whole delegation model is very well set up and easy to use from an Extranet User Manager point of view. You know, as users or groups are created through our tool, under the hood, we're actually creating those in Azure AD. So all the same benefits of Azure AD B2B, you've still got there. The fact that you don't need licenses for those external users because they're coming in through B2B, that still stands there. So it's very good from that perspective. You know, we manage the invitation process. You still go through Azure AD for the login process, and I'll show you how we can streamline that and brand that as well. And then we manage the group membership, you apply permissions, and away you go from there. So that's really on the Office 365 side. From an on-premises or other systems, what we're calling this now is actually our native experience, where we're not using Azure AD at all. We actually act as the identity provider. So we do the single sign-on, whether you've created a local account with your email address and password, or whether you're federating to things like Facebook, Google, Microsoft accounts. You know, that's up to you as to how you implement it. And the nice thing there is we own that whole login experience. We can fully brand that, we can fully customize that, tailored exactly how your user experience requirements are through there. Of course, things like forgotten password reset need to be there. People are going to forget their credentials. We have support for multi-factor authentication, so we can do SMS, second factor authentication. We support everything from SharePoint 2010 up to 2019. But also other applications as well. You know, Azure websites, which actually we're going to be showing you today as part of our test drive. Other SaaS applications, Desire to Learn is one example one of our clients is using. Other clients have integrated into SAP, into custom applications. You know, and we can even provision user profiles in those other applications so that they can use those effectively from there. So from a feature set point of view, we kind of group the product features into two main groups. And the first is on the end user side, which is the registration and sign in, things like setting your password, managing your profile, resetting a forgotten password. Not all those apply in the B2B scenario because we don't manage the identity there, but basically anything that touches the external user is part of the end user components. And then we have what's called our admin console. It's also a web site that you go to, you sign into, and this is where you manage the users and the groups and the application as a whole. And there's different security roles in here. So you can delegate to somebody to say, you own this particular group, which means you get to manage the users in that group, but that's all you can do. You can't create new groups, you can't configure the system as a whole. You need to be either a group editor or a configuration editor from a security role point of view to be able to do those things. Branding, of course, is very important. Two examples here, Ontario MD and Marchadime Stroke Survivor are public sites that they're running our technology, very unique and different. I mean, in the Ontario MD example, they're looking for just email address and password. They don't want any social logins as part of that. It is a physician portal. There's access to health systems as part of this, so fairly secure. They don't want people coming in with their Facebook account for that. Versus after stroke on the March of Dimes side, it's very much consumer facing, where these are stroke survivors, supporters, healthcare professionals supporting stroke survivors, and really building a digital community around that. So we want it to be very easy for people to join that community, use their Google, use their Facebook, Microsoft accounts to come in as part of that. I've mentioned the delegation side before. This is an important part of our model, is this idea that you can delegate the management of those external users to the business themselves, that they're able to decide who to invite in, who to remove, and that IT doesn't need to be there to manage those accounts. IT knows that governance is in place, you've got a well-structured system and rules in place around that, but they don't need to be there for each user that's being brought into the system. Those users may go through a self-registration process, and this again is highly customizable. What profile fields you want to capture, whether you want to integrate it into any sort of back-end systems is all part of this as well. Adding and removing fields is quite easy on here. It's simply doing some HTML editing. So yes, you do need to be comfortable from an HTML point of view, but you don't need to write any code as part of that. You just name the fields appropriately, set them up in the database, and away you go. Everything wires up from there. As you get more sophisticated, maybe you want to integrate this into, say, Dynamics 365 to create CRM records as part of this. Yes, there's a little bit more coding involved in doing that, but we have a full API available to do that. Now, one of the things I'll chat more about today, though, is eliminating the need to do that through code and actually using Microsoft Flow to do a lot of those integrations. And it's a nice way to say, hey, somebody just registered, now go do these other things, record a record in CRM, set their profile up in this other line of business application. That can all be done through Flow. And as I mentioned before, everything from SharePoint 2010 to 2019 from an on-premises point of view, as well as Office 365, we support there. Now, it doesn't actually get installed on the SharePoint server if you're on premises. You can, but it doesn't install into SharePoint itself. It goes into its own IaaS site. So you can host it locally or up in the cloud from there. It's pretty straightforward. Once you've installed the product, there's just some PowerShell that you run either against your on-premises SharePoint or against Office 365 to set up the trusts and connect it up from there. Fully adaptive, so if you're working on a mobile device, whether that's a smartphone, a tablet, or you're on your desktop, it leverages Bootstrap from a framework point of view, and it responds nicely across all those different devices. And as I already mentioned, you can either host it on premises or up in your Azure subscription, or we can manage it on our side on your behalf. Licensing side, I promised to keep this brief. We have a very simple licensing model. It's based on the number of external users. We should add that caveat in there coming into the system. So at a light edition, that you have less than 250 external users. That's $250 a month USD. And then 250 to 5,000 users at $400 a month, and unlimited anything above 5,000 users at $650 a month. So quite reasonable from a pricing point of view and quite simple to understand. We're trying to avoid the complexity of most vendors, Microsoft included, in terms of how their licensing model works. We've got the full details up on our website. We're very transparent around our pricing model. All right, so let's switch gears and take you into our new test drive demo. I'd had hoped to do this on our live site. We're just a little behind. We're still going to be launching it this week out onto the full production site. What I'm going to do is take you through our dev version of that site. So when we send the follow-up email tomorrow with the recording and such, my hope is that we've got all that live up there, and we'd love to actually have you try this out yourself as well. So let's flip over, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a brand new incognito window here and come in as a net new user. So you can actually try this yourself. We've exposed our development site anonymously externally as well. So instead of www, it's www.dev.extranetusermanager.com, and that will bring you into the new version of our website. We've got our cookie policy that we need to accept because we're incognito. There we go. And I'm not going to go through the site as a whole. We've got some interesting new content in there, but what I want to dive into is this new test drive section here. And basically what it does is it allows you to experience the product and go through some of the user experience things I was just talking about yourself for real using the product. just close Logan's drift here. And the first decision that you have as you come into this is, do I want to go down a native path or a B2B path? And we know we've got some videos we need to create to explain this a little better. Really, it's do I want to use Office 365? Then I need to go down the B2B path. We should make that clear and obvious. Or if I want to control the whole user experience and I'm not going to Office 365, then I want to go down the native path. For today, since everybody's using Office 365, I'm going to explore down the B2B Office 365 side of things. So I go ahead and try it out here. If you have a sharp eye, you'll notice that we actually just changed to a different website here. The reason we do that is because we need to create two separate identities, one for the native experience and one for the B2B experience. We can't do that at the same time on the same site, so we actually split it out into its own test drive site from it. It's still got all of the website connections, so you can kind of jump back and forth very easily between the two different sites, but we're now down into the B2B side of things. So let's start with the register and sign in. As I explained at the beginning of the deck, this is probably the biggest pain point from a user experience point of view, and the one that you need to pay the most attention to in terms of the onboarding process. And you'll see as I go through, there's still quite a few steps here. And unfortunately, because we're going through B2B, we don't have control over all those steps. But we've done our best to optimize that experience and make it as simple as possible for people. So what you can do on any of these test drive sections here is come to the live demo tab and go ahead and just experiment with that. Now, all the other ones, obviously, you'll need an account first, so you kind of have to start with register and sign in. So let's actually go ahead and start here. So what it's doing now is it's actually going to the combined registration and the login experience that I was talking about. So as I mentioned, we're not asking you whether you already have an account and you want to sign in or whether you want to create an account. We're going to figure that out for you. You may know that you already have an Azure account. We've debated, should we just remove that to make it simpler for people? Because really they should be coming down this email path. And let's just go ahead and start that process. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a made up test email here and one that I haven't used before. And I'm going to go ahead and hit continue on this. So what we did there was we looked up in our system and said, hey, have I seen Carson 18 before? Do they already have an account on this portal? The answer is no. Then I need to go into the registration flow. So we're capturing a fairly minimal amount of registration information, just a name, country, and organization. So let me go ahead and fill that in. And as I mentioned, this is fully customizable. If there's other profile fields that you want to capture, you can certainly add them to this step. You can also add them to a later step. We'll bring up a public profile that actually has additional information. Because one of the things you want to decide as you're building out your user flow here is you want to capture the minimum amount of information on initial registration. If you put up a form that's got 20 or 30 fields that people need to fill in order to create their account, you're going to scare them off, and a lot of them are just going to drop off and not continue through the process. So you want to get the bare minimum here, and then you can come back later and ask additional questions to build out the profile more deeply from there. So let's go ahead and hit the register link. So what we're doing under the hood here now, I mentioned we're built on top of Azure Active Directory business to business, is we're actually calling out to Microsoft through their APIs and creating that account. So the account is now being created and it's starting to flip over to the Microsoft side of things. And what Microsoft's doing, depending on how your tenant is set up and what type of user is coming in, people get different user experiences through here. The scenario that I've got right now is we've set it up not to use the one-time passcodes, but to require people to create accounts on the Microsoft side if they don't already have Office 365 or Azure AD. If they already have Office 365, it would just take them right through their sign-in process and it would be a very simple process from there. I actually prefer the one-time passcode. I should have set this demo up this way on here. We're experimenting with both flows to make sure that we can support them through there. So what Microsoft wants me to do here is to create a password for this new account that I'm creating. And this is not a password on your Extranet portal. It's actually a password with Microsoft. So if you were then to use this account to do other things on other unrelated portals, it would be those same set of credentials. So it is a single set of credentials through there. Now, before Microsoft lets me do that, they want to know that I actually own that email address and I'm the real person there. So let me come back here. If we look at my invitations, there's an invitation code that Microsoft just sent me. So I need to put that code in here to prove that I own that email address, and it can then continue in the account setup process. And that's an important step. Even in our native flow, we do the same thing. You create the account, we send a verification email to you, and you have to enter in that code because we need to know that you actually are who you say you are. You could put somebody else's email address in and create a spoof account in their name on our portal. We don't really want that to be happening for obvious reasons. Okay, do I want to stay signed in? Sure. I'm incognito, it doesn't really matter how I answer that question. And the next one, again, this one confuses people. We have to go through this because we are doing the federation. We have to accept the permissions on here. And again, even in our native experience, if you were to come in through your federated Microsoft or Facebook or Google account, you would see the same thing from Facebook or Google to say, hey, this site wants to use your account. Are you okay with that? You need to accept that. And you can see I've gone through about 6 or 7 different steps at this point in the process here now. This one here, we're actually working to eliminate. We don't actually need to ask this question. We need to just continue right through because I'm already signed in and come back to the portal from there. So now I'm back where we started. We went through a number of hoops there, but the key thing was, though, that it was a single contiguous flow. I didn't stop and restart that process. I had to flip out to my email to get the verification code, but then I put it right back into the flow where I was, and I continued along, and I ended up back where I started. You can see up in the top right here is my pcarson18 @eum.co account. I'm now signed into our site with that account. So I've successfully not just created my account, but signed into the portal, and I'm ready to start doing things from here. Now, I mentioned before, we can have an extended profile beyond what we capture in the registration process. So let's go over to the Try My Profile and have a look at that. So if I come to the live demo here, it's pulled up my profile information that I entered in the registration, but things like province, we didn't ask on the initial registration, but maybe we still want to know that. So I'm actually based in Ontario, even though I'm in Washington State right now. And let's put in some dummy profile data here. And go ahead and update that profile. So it's now written that back into our profile database. And if we had points of integration in other systems that need that profile, things like Flow can actually drive that and bring that across. In fact, let's switch the order here a little bit. I was going to go into the groups, but let's dive right over onto the Flow integration side, because this is kind of cool. You'll notice here on the profile, we've got a public profile and a public profile French. Chose French because we're in Canada, we're a bilingual country, kind of makes sense to show some interesting things from a Flow point of view. And what we're doing on the Flow integration side is we have the ability to trigger flows either through things happening in Extranet User Manager, like a new user registering, or other triggers may cause that to happen. But we can also read and write information from Extranet User Manager. We have a custom connector I'll show you in a minute as part of that. So let's go ahead and trigger this flow. And what this flow is going to do is it actually takes the English text that I put into my public profile here. It calls out to the cognitive services that are freely available to Flow to do a translation from English to French of that text. And then it calls our custom connector to write that back into our profile in here. So if I refresh here, usually only takes about 5 or 10 seconds for that flow to run. Je ne parle pas français, but I can at least understand that, yes, that does say the French equivalent of this is my first test. So actually, let's flip over and have a look at the Flow side of that for a minute. It's pretty interesting how that works. I just need to get another Chrome profile up here, hop into Flow, go ahead and sign in. And we actually have 2 flows in here. One is for the B2B experience that we're going through right now, and the other is for the native experience. So we want the B2B flow. So let's actually go and have a look at that. So we can see that flow just ran 1 minute ago. It took 4 seconds to run, so pretty quick. Let's have a look at what that does. So it's triggered off what's called an HTTP post. So that form, when we're back on this page here, when I press that trigger flow button, it's actually doing a REST call to Flow itself that causes this flow to start running. We grab a couple variables and things from there. And this is where we call it to the cognitive services, where we say, hey, take this text here and get the translated text from there. So I didn't need to build anything to do that. I just add this connector in, which is really easy to do to do that French translation. Now we want to now update that back in. So you can see this is our Extranet user manager icon. That's our custom connector. And we're basically saying, hey, based on the user that signed in here, go get all of their data. There's our pcarson18 account in here. Parse it out, go through some conditions on that, and then at the end of all that, call back to our API to update that user and set their new data. So down in here, you can see here's my public profile information, and here's my French. So it's actually writing that French data back in through there. And at the end of that, also send an email out to let them know that that update has happened. So in fact, if I go back to my inbox here, we can see here's that test email that came through to me with my English public profile and my French translation of that. So you can see it's fairly easy in Flow to build out fairly sophisticated processes through here. In fact, I can just add in, if I go into add an action here, we'll see there's literally hundreds of connectors. And it's not strictly the Microsoft ecosystem. If you want to send a tweet out and update something in Salesforce and connect to Facebook, you know, all those connectors exist and more in here. So it's pretty amazing the things that you can do in Flow through here. So imagine in our registration example, if we needed to do things like set up a profile on another system and record that in CRM, you know, we can actually do all that through Flow itself and through these connectors. So it's a great way to build out those business processes behind those user flows. All right, I said I was going to start with groups. We flipped the order around, but let's go back to the group side here now. So the groups are this concept of, you know, how do we get a number of people together and apply permissions to the right spots for them so that they can do what they need to do, whether that's a project site, a committee site, a customer site, a vendor site. You know, there's lots of different examples from that point of view. And we have a couple of different group concepts. We've got this idea of public groups versus private groups. And the idea behind public groups is that, you know, here I am on a public-facing website. Yes, I'm signed in right now, but I could be anonymously on the site, and I would still see these groups through here. So I can self-discover them, ask to join them. In the case of the first one here, it's set up with no approval on it. I'm just in that group. It's very simple and straightforward from there. Versus this one here is going to have an approval step on here. So let's actually have a look behind the scenes at how those groups are set up and what that looks like. So this is the admin console that I was referencing for our Extranet User Manager product. So I can come in here and let's say I want to search a group. Let's go look for that that public group that we're just looking at there. So here's our public group, no approval group. It's active. Go ahead and open that up. So as a group editor, you know, somebody that has elevated rights in here, I can define new groups and I can configure how those groups work. So what do I want to call the group under the hood, and what do I want to show it in this view here in terms of its title? And then what are some of the details around that group? You know, does it require approval or not? Well, this particular one we've named no approval, so we've left the approval turned off. If that was turned on, DevRash, who's our QA manager, would get the approval emails for that. So you can define group by group who gets those approvals. Now, if you wanted to get more sophisticated around that, maybe you've got rules based on, you know, what email domain the user's coming from and who approves that. You could actually turn off our out-of-the-box approval emails and use Flow, for example, on that to say, hey, somebody just requested into this group, trigger the Flow, go through the different business cases and checks through there and decide who needs to do the approval for that. And that's approved, put them into the group. And that's all possible through Flow. Now, this particular group we do want available for registration. Maybe it's an invitation-only group that we don't want anybody to be able to register for either privately or publicly. We could turn that off. It's on, so there's actually a URL here that I can copy and share with people to say, hey, if you've got this link, this will take you directly in to be able to ask to join the group. In this particular scenario, it's a public group, so I can just see it on the website, but maybe it was a private group and we didn't want to see that. So this is driven by the publicly available on or off here. If it's not a group, we're going to turn that off. Now, at the end of the day, you know, this group typically is associated with some sort of resource, which is a site URL. In this case, we're actually going to Sherpin Online to a particular site here. And then down here, we've got summary and description. So this is what shows up at the summary level Here, I'm going to drill into that group to request to join it, the full details of the group. I can define all that here through the description. Now, we just put in a small amount of text here. It is full HTML rich text, so if you want to put images in there and different formatting and things like that, make this more compelling, you can absolutely do that. In fact, we should do that just from a demo point of view in here. If we keep coming down through here, we see we have 3 different buckets of people in here. The first is the owners group, who has rights to manage the users that are in this group. So you can add owners to this and delegate down to the business for that. Who are the members that already exist in the group, and then what requests are coming through. In this particular scenario, we're not going to see any requests in here because there's no approval on it. They just go straight into the members. But if approval was required, they would come here first. There's email notifications to say, hey, there's a new membership request, but you can come in here to see the high-level view and say, oh, we've got 4 or 5 that are outstanding that haven't been approved. Let me just go ahead and approve them right through here. So let's come back to our external user view. And sorry, I'm wearing 2 different hats here. It gets confusing sometimes. So I'm now back at the website that I registered and created my account on. I see the details about this group, but I actually haven't joined it yet. So let's just go ahead and hit the join group. Now, in this case, I've already signed into the system. It already knows who I am. So it's a fairly simple process. It's just going to join the group and bring me to a confirmation page here. If I wasn't signed in, it actually blends that registration and sign in and the group join all together. So it actually takes you through a single flow where you go through the enter your email address. Oh, we don't have an account for you. Let's create the account, go through the Microsoft side of things, and end up back here at the end as a member of this group. So again, keeping that theme of a single flow, no breaks in it as you're trying to achieve a particular task, like joining a group as an anonymous user. Now, there is one caveat here. We've got a challenge on the Microsoft side that there is a delay before I can actually do the view site here. What's happening behind the scenes is we've updated everything in Azure Active Directory, but there's some back-end sync processes between Azure AD and SharePoint Online that needs to happen before I can actually successfully get into that site. So we're actually working with the product group on that. They're aware of this. It's been a long-standing issue. Whether there's a way to push that, or at least to find out whether that's completed or not, to notify the user from there. What I'm going to do instead, though, is actually flip gears back over to here. Got another tab open of that site. So that's the site that's associated with the group that we saw when we were setting the group up. And this is what I see, not as a group member, but as a group owner coming into that site. So it's intentionally a very plain, out-of-the-box SharePoint team site, so there's nothing special about it from that point of view. We've got a documents library here, so I can upload documents, download documents, collaborate, do whatever I have permissions to do. You could decide whether the members only have read-only rights in here and they can just consume content, or whether they have contribute rights and they can actually collaborate with you on documents in here. And the full SharePoint experience, things like co-authoring, extends out to the external users as well. So if you are doing a collaborative externally shared site, they can benefit from all those same features. In fact, they can even sync to sync with their OneDrive clients down onto their local system, which makes it easy to work with those documents. Again, it doesn't differentiate between a staff member versus an external user. They get access to all the same features. What we have added in here, though, is this SharePoint Framework web part that we've created for our product. And what it's showing us is the members of this group. So as a group owner, I can add in a net new user. So I can actually go through an invitation process to add a user specifically without having them come discover and register themselves. I can pick an existing user, like Deborah, she's our QA manager, and edit him. And again, we can customize what fields come up through here. Or I can remove him from the group, send him an email. I can get that private registration link that I was showing you before, copy that and email that to somebody to say, hey, I'd like you to join this group, or share this with other people to join it. Or I can come over here to the edit group, we'll actually launch back into the same page that we were on before over here, which is the details for that group. So if I needed to do more sophisticated things like changing the approvals and approvers and such through that, I would do that through this interface here. But the goal is that the bulk of what the site owners or the group owners are going to need to do, they can do right in context within the site itself. So now this is not just available from a SharePoint Online point of view. In fact, if I come over to Microsoft Teams, Teams is something that we're doing a tremendous amount with. We're using it ourselves extensively. It's become our primary communication tool at Envision IT, but also with our clients, Teams is getting a huge adoption curve from that point of view. So if I come into my Microsoft Teams, sorry, it takes a minute just to load. I should have preloaded this. Because these sites, like this public group no approval site, is actually a modern team site, we've actually created it as a full Office 365 group with a Microsoft team behind it as well. I don't want to create an org by team right now. Oh, I'm in the wrong tenant. Sorry, I don't have this wired together. What I should see is the team for this particular site here. We've actually got it set up on a different tenant. And this web part that I have here is actually exposed right through the Teams interface as well. So if you live in Teams, rather than in SharePoint, you've got your whole file experience over in Teams there. You can actually do all that management of the group right through the Teams interface as well. I'll have to update that for a future demo. All right, so let's come back to our test drive here. So we've gone through most of the items in here. We did the registration, we looked at our profile, we saw how Flow can do some cool translation and updating that profile. We came into groups. Actually, let me finish off here. We really just went through the public groups side of things. What I want to show you as well is the My Groups feature here. So I can see here that I have now membership in this public group no approval. So it's an easy way for people to discover what groups they belong to and navigate to those sites. And then we've got the concept of private groups. So I mentioned the private registration links that you can share out. This is an example of what one looks like here. You know, if I click on that, I can actually go through that same join group process. So I can't self-discover it, but if somebody shares that invitation URL with me, I'm able to use that and come into that group. And again, that invitation may require approval, or it may allow people straight in from there. Less of a test drive, more of a technical thing here. If you want to go sort of further than Flow from an integration point of view, we do have a full API for our product as well. You come in here to the Swagger page. Swagger is an open source methodology for documenting and explaining how APIs work. So you can see our full product APIs available to us here. In fact, we were going through the updating of the user in that Flow scenario. So it was doing a get and a push of a particular user through here. You don't need to know these API details to use our custom connector in Flow, though. You can just use the connector, wire up the steps, and away you go from there. And if you're a hardcore coder and you want to get deeper under the hood, you know, all those different features are available for the product through there. All right, I mentioned we probably wouldn't use the full hour. We're a little ahead of time, so that's good. I'll give a little time back to people, but a couple of points I just want to wrap up with before we close out here. The first is that really good user experience is hard. You know, making things simpler and less steps is not less work. It's almost exponentially more work, but it's incredibly important. If you think about that onboarding experience, you know, any points of confusion, any what should I do here kind of questions that come up, are going to cause people to drop off through there. And they won't just have a bad user experience, they'll have no user experience because they'll give up on your portal and they won't continue through that journey. So really think about the steps that you're asking people to go through and optimize that. You know, questions like the registration itself, what things am I asking there? And how do I not make that onerous by trying to ask for too many things up front? Maybe save that for a later step when you need it, and keep it as simple as possible. You know, that simplicity is one of the key things from a user experience design point of view. Is simple is better, less is more. It's hard work, but it's absolutely worth it from that point of view. A couple of notes on upcoming events. We've got Microsoft Ignite coming up in just under a month now. So lots of interesting announcements going to be coming down the pipe from Microsoft on that side. I'm actually going to be doing a recorded session with Kristen Buckley, who's our Chief Marketing Officer, down at Ignite, sort of a recap of what's important from our point of view. Because of Ignite is such a broad topic, it covers all Microsoft technologies. We're going to be zeroing in more on the the Office 365, Azure AD, external sharing, that side of things. I'm also going to be both presenting and delivering a full-day workshop at SharePoint Fest in Chicago in December. So if you're in the area there, interested, by all means come out. Love to see you there. And from there, I'm going to wrap up. Logan, Amanda, if there's any questions that we haven't asked, feel free to jump on the line there.
I think we're okay, Peter.
Awesome. Well, with that, I will bid you adieu. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for tuning in. Bye now.